Okay, let's start. Hello, everyone. I am Aron Aji, and next to me is Kathleen Maris Paltunieri with those beautiful plants. Kathleen is our center coordinator, and I'm the faculty director of the Center for Translation and Global Literacy that was made possible by a U.S. Department of Education National Resource Center grant. This is a grant that we will benefit from for 4 years. This is our second year, and part of the opportunities the center gives us is, in fact, the student travel grants. And you have all received the information, I hope, about the application materials and requirements. I will go over them with you. But also, Kathleen just typed the URL where you can find all the information. Obviously, you can read on your own. I will try not to read everything, but maybe unsurprisingly, there's a lot of material that I will read and then maybe clarify and elaborate. And I'm hoping that we will have some time for your questions as well, because, you know, one grant, this program, it encourages individualized projects. And so we would like to have some time to hear from you about your own questions. Before we go into the questions, though, we will hear from two of the recipients from last year, Tony Santi and Melanie Carbine, who received the grant last year and conducted a research that involved travel. And those will also help you think as you are putting together your proposals, okay? The grant is available to those who would like to travel to locations abroad or in the United States to do work that is only doable, only feasible on location. That is, any project that you can conduct while you are in Iowa City or any of your hometowns would not qualify you. So when you're thinking about a project, make sure you make it very clear why you have to travel to complete this project, okay? And we will talk to you a little bit about the kinds of things that we are thinking of with regards to what makes a project travel, what makes travel necessary for these projects. In fact, you know, for example, if you are thinking of doing a translation project and it is a site-specific book, let's say, you can then justify being on site to learn more about the history and the, you know, even the physical properties of the environment, but also to interview your author, perhaps. Or you may be interested in a project that involves interviewing translators. You know, whatever it is, the travel component has to be, you know, well thought out and integrated into your project. The other thing is, as far as the US locations, this is something we decided to do ourselves because of the university's commitment to community engaged research and scholarship. We also strongly support projects that involve perhaps interning or shadowing with a cultural or social service or social justice organization, where translation is, in fact, an integral part of their services. and you can, in fact, then travel within the United States. Okay? The awards range from $1,500 to $2,500. We will talk a little bit about the budget in a few minutes to explain why we're giving you a range rather than a fixed figure, okay? And the travel grants are available to undergraduates and graduates. However, we do prioritize undergraduates simply because the U.S. Department of Education prioritizes undergraduates. That said, last year, in fact, we did grant several graduate students travel grants. So I'm happy to see some graduate students also applying, okay? So you're fine in applying, and I will strongly recommend that you apply, but priority will be given to undergraduates, but again, from among worthy applications. Okay, so you have to first qualify for the application, and then we will consider the graduate and undergraduate difference, okay? So just feel free to apply and make a good, solid case for yourself. Now, the grants are available to both U.S. as well as international students. We do not make any kind of distinction as to whether you would like to go back to your home country, those of you who are international, as long as, in fact, your research justifies this particular trip, you can, in fact, use it to go back to your own home country. However, bear in mind that part of the application will also involve a certain calendar of activities. So if your grant project is embedded inside a personal trip as well, you still have to clearly and compellingly describe what you will do in those project dates, okay? Does that make sense? And the grant obviously will only pay or reimburse you for expenses directly associated with your research, okay? All right, let me give you an example. Let's say that you are going back to Madagascar. You're a student from Madagascar. And let's say that you're going to do your research in one location in Madagascar, but your family lives in another location. We will reimburse you for travel to Madagascar, but we will not reimburse you for travel from your research location to your family location. Okay, does it make sense? All right, wow. Okay, language proficiency is important, and you have to indicate, in fact, in your application form, and we will look at your transcripts as well, to demonstrate that you have the language proficiency sufficient to undertake this research grant, this project. And you have to be in in terms of your progress at Iowa, you have to be at such point that you have to come back to Iowa for at least one semester after receiving this grant. Okay, you have to be a continuing student. Okay, the grants are not available to students after they graduate. Okay, so in terms of application procedure, there is something that I want to really underscore here, and that is we strongly recommend that you work very closely with a faculty mentor. We have, in fact, made the faculty recommendation letter and your application much more closely connected. So we expect your faculty mentor to, in fact, speak to your project knowledgeably and not only to your person, okay? So that's why you should work with a faculty mentor in imagining your project. Okay? Then I'd like to also point out that any kind of research project sponsored by the university is subject to federal guidelines regarding institutional review of human subject research. This often scares people in the humanities away because we think that, oh my goodness, if I have to interview an author or interview locals, do I have to go through IRB? IRB is about human subject research that can be, in fact, invasive, such as taking blood or gathering, samples or tissue samples or whatever. However, for example, if you're doing a psychology research and you, in fact, have a very well-calibrated survey that, in fact, is of personal nature, that also needs to go through IRB approval. In most cases, humanities research will not require IRB approval. However, you still have to fill out this HAWK IRB form that is found on a URL that has been provided for you in your application form. And again, if in most cases, you will be cleared without having to make a full application, okay? But you have to do that. And this applies, by the way, to Stanley grants as well, okay? So we're not doing something that's very different. It's the same kind of rigor that all university-sponsored research activities are subject to. Let me also add one thing. Excuse me. You can actually apply to multiple sources of travel grants, and we are not going to check if you get another one before we decide whether to give you money. We will be, in fact, evaluating you on the merit of your application, okay? Because these grants are reimbursement grants, whether Stanley's or ours, you will not be able to get cold cash for receiving, let's say, $10,000 for a project that cost you only, let's say, $7,000. So, I mean, in the end, you get reimbursed for actual expenses, right? So for that reason, you shouldn't really worry. In fact, we ask you to disclose to us if you are applying to other grants, especially in the cases when your travel budget exceeds the $2,500, which almost always it does. And you can just say, this is going to cost me $3,500 and I'm going to pay the rest from my own pocket. That's fine too. So, but what I would like for you to understand is that we're not going to hold it against you if you get the Stanley, okay? Right? Okay, well, nobody wants to do the hands up. I don't know why, but today I'm doing the thumbs up. Okay? So application deadline is January 22nd. Do not forget that, and we will hold to that deadline as firmly as possible, okay? You can read the obligations that grant recipients have to observe. You have to attend a mandatory preparation session in late March or April. And then on your return, you have to make a public presentation in some form or another. And you have to submit a report by September 30th for summer break grants, or by March 31st for winter break grants, which also means that you can actually travel during winter break. The minimum time we expect you to spend on your travel grant research project is 3 weeks. So that means if you do this in the winter break, that means leaving right after school and celebrating whatever holiday you observe, maybe somewhere else beside your house. Okay. Now, the application form also is very self-explanatory. The beginning gives you a list of things that you have to certify that all of them are true in your case, okay? That you are currently enrolled, you're in good academic standing, you're a graduate or an undergraduate student, that you have a proficiency in languages relevant to your project, and that you will come back to the university. We don't want you to stay where you go, come back. And that you are willing to make a presentation, okay? So those are this. Now, the travel check is an important thing for you to keep in mind. Our world is a difficult place, as you know. And where we can travel as public universities, well, in fact, public and private universities, is subject to federal advisories. And some instances, certain countries are listed advisory level 3 or 4, which means there is active conflict on the ground that may in fact impact your research activity or your personal safety. In those instances, you have to choose either a different location or get prior approval for travel to high-risk areas, okay? Again, funding will not be released without prior approval through the petition process. We've had students applying to Stanley, not for this grant. Tony, you didn't have to have this last year, did you?
Yeah, I did have to for Egypt.
Okay, so maybe you can just comment on that when you are up. But indeed, some countries are on advisory level 3 or 4, in which case you have to sort of explain why you feel okay going there, okay? Then we ask you to indicate and name your faculty mentor. That's important, right? And then you have to put together this project proposal. Let me take a little bit of time going over each of these guidelines, because we want you to put together 800 to 1,000 word document. It's not onerous, but it has to be detailed, and it has to address certain questions or areas in which we need your information. First and foremost, you have to describe clearly and compellingly. We always like to be excited when we read your proposals, so it has to be compelling. And you have to describe clearly and compellingly your project and its anticipated outcomes. This can be, in fact, in 2 sentences. You just want to say, I want to travel, blah, 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 to do ta, 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 which will save lives and bring world peace or something. The second one is identify your travel locations, specific start and end dates, and the period during which you plan to travel. Just very simple, factual material. Then summarize your plan of work, what you are hoping to do there, and your research method or your field work design. Why are you going there, and what specifically are you planning on doing? Okay. and then provide evidence that you have the necessary academic and linguistic preparation necessary, and then address how the travel location and duration of stay relate to your project goals, okay? So when we receive this narrative from you, we want to understand as much as we can the material characteristics of the project you intend to undertake and complete, okay? By the way, a project can be, in fact, part of a larger project that may, in fact, mean that your the travel grant portion of that project will not have decisive and conclusive results, okay? You can, in fact, apply for this grant in order to do a research that is necessary to write your dissertation or to write your critical introduction to your honors thesis, okay, which you will do when you come back, right? So that's fine too. The next part is really important in the application. Again, this is still inside the 800 to 1,000 words. Demonstrate your project's significance and potential to make an impact on a specific audience or community. Now, you may say, what do you mean by impact? For example, if you are undertaking a translation project, you are therefore hoping to contribute to the reception of that literary tradition from that locality in the English language, right? So that's a very significant contribution in our field, okay? Last year, we also had a student who traveled to a location in order to conduct research among indigenous populations in order to incorporate the information into a fiction project. That can be done as well. But again, think about why does this project, what's the significance of your project? It doesn't mean you're going to save the world, but it has to have some significance, right? And the relevance of this project to your academic progress. How is this project linked to what you are doing while at the University of Iowa, okay? It doesn't always have to involve a thesis or honors designation, none of that, it doesn't have to. But you have to sort of link this project to either prior coursework or future work toward completion of your Iowa degree, okay? Does it make sense? Is it clear? You may have some questions about this we can address. I want to also underscore travel grants can also be received while you are studying abroad, okay? So those of you who are undergraduates and you want to study abroad, let's say next fall or spring, we will consider your applications, okay? All right. Now we want you to also put together a projected budget, and the word projected is important. Obviously, you will not have nailed down to the last nickel and dime how much this will cost you, but you have to give us some estimates. And those estimates are available to you by looking at some travel sites and identifying how much, let's say, train travel will be or is likely to be in the period when you hope to travel. That you can do by doing any one of these travel servers. And so you can identify. There is an example budget, a sample budget or a model budget that we have in the application. This is only a model budget, okay? There may be other cost, other items of expense. So for that, you just add other lines to this budget, okay? But typically, travel involves some kind of airfare or bus or taxi or some kind of transportation. So the transportation cost is one area. Typically, it involves some stay, right? Room and board. And typically, it involves some food. We don't want you to be homeless, hungry, and only walk there, right? So we want to be able to reimburse you for just the legitimate and common expenses associated with travel, all right? Now, and we also give you some links on your application form to actually find out what kind of per diem you may request. Per diem means how much money you anticipate spending for food and whatnot. And so those are sort of ways in which we are trying to be helpful to you. Now, again, your travel budget does not have to be identical to the amount you are requesting. It can be larger, nor does it have to be $2,500 in cost. You can actually request $1,000 if that's all you need, okay? What questions? Oh, let's not go to the questions. We have to first do this. Kathleen, have I covered everything?
Yes, I think so. You've talked about, really what we're looking to fund in terms of the types of projects. You've covered the importance of having a faculty mentor who will be writing a
Very
specific
important, yeah.
letter for the student, and that the student you all should really be collaborating with your mentor and going through your application ideas. And then you went through the proposal guidelines really, really well, emphasizing, the project description, describing how, what the significance and impact of the project is, how it connects to your academic goals, whether short-term or long-term. And then also information about the budget and yeah. Before we leave, I would love if everyone could put we will, of course, aren't leaving soon, but if people could put their email addresses in the chat, then I will go ahead and email you the application form that has those specific details as well as the budget that Aaron just covered through.
Good. And now what I will do is I will ask Melanie and Tony to say a little bit about your projects from last year, if we don't mind, Melanie going first.
Hi, Melanie. I did put together a couple little pictures, so if I could share my screen, I'd be happy.
Let's make sure you can share screen. Let me just. That's very nice. We have visuals. Very nice.
It's not super amazing or anything, but do you see my Google Slides here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so my project kind of stemmed out of a paper that I was working on. I had interviewed several Marshallese translators about how they translate, right? And in what ways they do. And was trying to feel like they found translation an isolating process for them in the ways that they were being asked to translate by global corporations, COVID translations, all those kinds of things. So I would have loved to have gone to the Marshall Islands, but I didn't really have to. This is a map of the Marshall Islands. It's in Micronesia. It's about a 5-hour plane ride from Hawaii. But there's as many Marshallese people in the US as there are in the Marshall Islands. So there are 30,000 Marshallese people in the Marshall Islands, and there's 30,000 in the US. And almost half of those people are in Arkansas. So my project involved travel to Arkansas, where I worked with the former consul general, because they have a consulate there. And I spoke with several other people in some pretty large Marshallese nonprofit organizations down there. I had just a little bit of information about like translations that have been done in Marshallese. So the Marshallese wasn't written down until about 150 years ago. The first translations were of the Bible, and then some transcriptions of traditional stories. 1976, a Marshallese English dictionary was published, and in 2010, the Republic of the Marshall Islands government adopted the orthography in that dictionary for their standard spelling. But that means that there's actually 2 different spelling systems that people are familiar with, particularly the spelling system that was used in the original translation of the Bible. This has led to some inconsistencies in translation. There aren't really any translation standards. There's not a lot of resources. I have a picture here of the Marshallese reference grammar, which is maybe the one authoritative text, but it's really hard and it's not really very accessible to translators. This other one, Getting It Done, written from a Marshallese, it's the research of a Marshallese scholar. It's really wonderful. It's almost impossible to get a hold of. I got this copy in the Library of Congress, and I had a friend take a picture of every single page. That's how I got that book. But there's all sorts of translations out there, a lot of, administrative forms, workplace safety, healthcare, occasionally storybooks. So I shouldn't say inconsistent. There's different spelling systems, right? And then there's different terms and, moral and translation. So how do we translate those terms? And what I really wanted to propose, what I proposed was that I would work with the consulate to help establish a translation network wherein translators could be accredited, like have a community-based accreditation, as opposed to sometimes like community clinics try to have programs and they certify people. Sometimes schools do it, but there's an asymmetrical like power differential, right? And then I thought that I was going to be making a translation guide, standard terms and things like that. What I actually ended up doing was really spending my time in Arkansas doing an interest assessment and talking to the different nonprofits about what they've been doing in terms of like heritage language, training for heritage language speakers to work as interpreters and translators, and talking to them about what they needed and wanted in order to network. And what I found was that some of the nonprofits were getting grants and things, but they were limited to travel or programming within the state, and they really wanted to network with each other across states, across countries, right? So if you look at this map, the biggest populations are in Hawaii and Arkansas, and then also Washington and Oklahoma. And so they wanted to be working with each other so that they weren't, coming up with different translations and different terms, but they were kind of limited by this. So after talking to, after my time in Arkansas, I was able to make a proposal for a translation association and ways that it could be done. And then what we did is we decided to put that plan into action. And so we took on, several people in different locations. So Washington, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Iowa, and the Marshall Islands. So we have people from all these different places working together to translate climate disaster plans for the International Office of Migration based in the Marshall Islands. So they had a template, and they wanted to have climate disaster plans for all of the atolls. So there's like 32 of them. And so we reviewed the translation together of the template, and through collaboration, revised it, translated some more information for it, started developing a glossary. And so I was going to show you real quick just kind of what that looked like. And you're still seeing my browser, right? Okay. So I took all of the documents and put it into this spreadsheet, and it goes down to like, I don't know, it's so long. But originally, we had 3 columns at first because we had the English text, the original translation, and then we were putting in ours. And then as we were discussing it together, like we started keeping notes, we started keeping a word list as we were developing new terms. And then per our suggestion to IOM, we'll have a glossary or a word list that goes out with the climate disaster plan. Looks I'm almost done with this. There's a few more sections that are still highlighted.
This is fascinating.
Yeah, so that was my project, and I think it's been really beneficial as far as creating a network of translators, and we worked on something that we felt was really meaningful.
And you notice, all of you, that in fact this is an ongoing project, that only a part of which we were able to support, but nonetheless a part that is significant to its furtherance, right? Thank you so much, Melanie. This is so exciting, and I'm so glad to see your slides as well. So that's a lot of very hard work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciated the grant. It was very helpful.
Thank you. And Tony?
Yeah, so I do not have a nice slideshow to present, but I use my grant for more of a traditional translation of a novel type project. It's also an ongoing project. I did not finish the novel in the 1-month trip to Egypt, unfortunately. It's still ongoing, but basically when I first heard about this grant last year around this time, instantly one novel came to mind that I was interested in. It's by this great Egyptian author. His name is Sanallah Ibrahim. And it was a novel that I had read and had a lot of questions about, and one that I knew I couldn't translate unless I went to Egypt. And so this novel, it follows, it all takes place in the Red Sea, and it follows a bunch of little fish on their stories around the Red Sea. And a lot of it may or may not be political allegory. That's up for debate. I met the author while I was there, and we kind of argued about it a little bit. So it's something I'm working on. But basically what had to happen as I was reading this novel here, it became clear that a lot of this fish vocabulary, this marine life vocabulary, had since switched to English. That these areas in the Red Sea, in Egypt in general, they were no longer referring to fish by what this novel used in the 80s. And I couldn't find these resources here. I couldn't find the proper people to meet with. So that was the main thing, was setting up some interviews with marine biologists on the Red Sea. My entire project was on the Red Sea. And part of that as well, that has to do with the fact that Egypt is listed as like a threat level 3. Unfortunately, so that did make it a little challenging at the start, but less than you might think. I had to be flexible with the area that I was willing to go to, because Sanallah himself wrote this novel on the Red Sea, but he wrote it in Hurghada, which is on the opposite side of the peninsula, of the Sinai Peninsula. And unfortunately, that area was a no-go for me. So I made a switch and went to Sharm el-Sheikh, which is the one little area that is still okay. It's a resort town. So I spent my time there, set up interviews with marine biologists. They weren't as helpful as I wanted them to be. And I actually found that surprisingly, Bedouin fishermen and older dive masters, like the dive masters of the generation, I would say, who started diving in the 80s or so, 70s maybe, they would be my best resource. And so a lot of my trip was just, I made a bank of all the fish vocabulary I needed that couldn't be found on the internet. And I would just go to these dive centers and find the oldest person in the dive center and just kind of work through these words. And it took a while. It was a lot of interviews, but it was a lot of fun. Learned my Arabic fish vocabulary is off the charts now. I mean, it doesn't compare to any other. I might be the best non-native Arabic speaker of fish vocabulary at this point, which is exciting, I guess. And yeah, I mean, the grant was huge for me. It enabled the whole thing. And I also want to mention that Professor Paltrineri was my mentor personally. And that Professor Aji is the guy who got me into translation. So this is an exciting little group for me to speak with. Yeah.
No, it's been a joy to work with you, Tony. Thank you so much. And I mean, these two projects speak so loudly and clearly and compellingly to the importance of the kind of global literacy and language mediation and language justice and translation work that we are trying to advocate through the center. Now, what questions do you have of us? Thank you so much. What questions you may have that we may be able to address? Yes, Don?
Yeah, can I ask a question? So, recently I have conducted a research about how ChatGPT support students complete like a larger scale writing assessment. And then our proposal was selected by L. And then, so for this proposal, we talk about, so translation is part of it because we were setting like 4 type of questions students may ask because ChatGPT to assist to complete the assignment. And then the type 3 question is the translation question. So it's like so we having students asking like how, like if you want to ask a translation question, and then what kind of question can you ask, and how many times students will ask those type of questions. And then we actually found out these are the top 2 questions students ask the most. So we are going to present this. We also have a research paper related to this. I wonder, can I apply for the travel grant for presenting and then, for travel? Do you think that will be
No, not for travel to present.
Yeah, to present, because our proposal has already been selected.
Yes.
So
but I will say you should definitely apply to international programs which has funds for travel to present. Now, where are you traveling to present?
I think it's Houston.
Oh, they won't. But no, because they will only support travel overseas. And are you a graduate student?
Yeah, I'm a PhD student, 2nd year.
Okay, so graduate college also has some funding for travel to present.
Yeah, I know, but I wonder because part of my research, like findings like related to translation, do you think I can apply for this fund too?
No, because it seems that you have already completed your project and it is to present. So we cannot support that, unfortunately.
So this is for doing research, that right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, got it.
No, but your project is very, very interesting. Unfortunately, we cannot support it.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck. Any other questions?
So
yes, Andrew.
I just have a comment. The first talk that was presented here, I thought it was really an incredible recognition of the importance of that particular language group and recognition that their language was so important to maintain that you were willing to go to all of the work to translate all of those documents and create this word bank. And then on the second project, I just think that it's so wonderful that we have money to support to send students to do this sort of ground level, research that we can build on.
Yes, absolutely.
Those are just a couple of thoughts.
No, thank you so much, Linda. No, this is very, very important. Melanie and Tony, and we also had 4 other students. I believe we were able to support 6 students last year. And I believe the list of their projects are also available on our website. And you should definitely go and take a look at those as well. The goal is to really support the students in the important work that they identify and want to conduct. Thank you so much. Andrew?
Yeah, so I'm in the English program here as an undergraduate, and I don't have a huge number of faculty connections. So do you have any advice about what responsibilities or like how I could frame the responsibilities of a faculty member when I would approach them to ask for, mentorship and guidance for this project?
Sure. The faculty mentor we are looking at is for someone who will help you through the project proposal. We don't really ask them to mentor you through the project. So, because I can imagine, someone may say, what is your language area, Andrew? What's your language?
I'm working with a German author and I have some proficiency in it.
Right.
But she's bilingual, and so we agreed that she would do like the translation work. But I have background in Soviet languages, and we're also connections like in.
Are you taking courses in our language programs?
I am not. I have as a dual enrolled student pre-COVID, but not currently.
Okay. So I ask this because you can also reach out to faculty in German or Russian here. Or as I said, in fact, I asked you the question because you can have, in fact, a creative writing faculty member who can help you put together the proposal. And who, however, doesn't speak German or Russian, let's say, right? And that's perfectly fine. This requirement came up because one of the most important skills that we would like all of our students to develop while they are at the university is, in fact, to put together a proposal. That by itself is an art, if you will, or maybe art and science. So we think it would be really good for you to work with a faculty member that you already have started some kind of a rapport with and see if they can sort of help you shape the proposal. What that means is they will probably help you brainstorm a little bit. And if you are already past the brainstorming stage, then they will help you, revise your drafts based on the kinds of information we are asking for, okay? So it's not a lot of work. It's probably a couple of meetings and a couple of emails, okay? And then, of course, they have to write a letter. All right?
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
I also just wanted to chime in briefly to say, I'm happy to answer questions too, Andrew, if you have like general proposal questions, or even if you want to talk through, we could set up a Zoom meeting to talk about, how you would approach, co-translating and things like that. If it's the first time you're doing this kind of translation work, and it sounds like you're already in great communication with the author, so I could help too with some of those translation questions if your faculty mentor is like a fiction professor or an English lit professor or something like this.
Sure. Great, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, all throughout the process, you can send us your questions to that CTGL email we have. CTGL Connect, is that what it is? We came up with a clever email moniker, and we regularly check the email, and we will, there it is, CTGL Connect. Okay? Any other questions? No? Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope this was helpful, informative. If new questions arise, feel free to connect with us, okay? And we really look forward to receiving your applications.
And if anyone else wants to, if you didn't have a chance to add your email to the chat, please do, and then I'll just send an email out to everyone with the application and the information sheet, so that you have all of those details as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone. And thank you, Tony and Melanie. It was so wonderful to hear about your projects. Very exciting. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.